I'm not a subject matter expert, but I bring to this talk a perspective of 28 years with the Department of Agriculture dealing primarily in animal health issues, and also since coming to AVMA, realization that this is indeed one of the most important topics that we are dealing with as a profession. And since it's so important to the profession, indeed one that is very important to AVMA. I will be talking from a veterinary perspective, but primarily from that of a food animal veterinary medicine perspective. We are a diverse profession. As Tony mentioned, 82,500 members. We are very, very diverse in that membership with a broad diversity of perspectives and opinions. And this is potentially one of the divisive issues within the veterinary profession. We brought together a task force to look at antimicrobial resistance, see if we couldn't come up with a common position, particularly as it related to use of antimicrobials for growth promotion and feed efficiency. And indeed, that group could not come to a common position, again, indicative of the difficult nature of this particular issue. Use of antimicrobials in companion animals is pretty much limited to therapeutic uses, with almost exclusively under a relationship with a veterinary client-patient relationship, as opposed to as opposed to food animal medicine, where there are much broader uses. I will be talking primarily from a food animal perspective. The first slide is really just 4 words, definitions, if you will: microorganisms, antimicrobials, antibiotics, and antimicrobial resistance. And I think we oftentimes use these terms interchangeably, referring to antibiotics and antimicrobials sometimes synonymously, when in fact they're different. And as this group well appreciates, antibiotics are a subset of antimicrobials. But for consistency's sake, both in domestic and international arenas, we typically refer to antimicrobials, and also recognize that antimicrobial resistance can occur not just with bacteria, but with other pathogens as well, as we are seeing, obviously, resistance to antiviral drugs occurring as they are occurring with antibiotics. I will add, though, that use of antivirals is very limited in veterinary medicine, and certainly not something that's common, if at all, used in production animal medicine. Use of antibiotics are approved by the Food and Drug Administration for 4 specific purposes: treatment, control, prevention, and production uses, or commonly referred to as growth promotion and feed efficiency. Again, these are FDA-approved uses for antibiotics in food animal medicine. They can be obtained from 3 primary sources, the first being over-the-counter, where producers are able to obtain some antibiotics and presumably are using them according to label directions on an FDA-approved label. And producers can put antimicrobials in feed or water, or often added to the feed mill, again, as approved, as directed on the FDA-approved label. Through Veterinary Feed Directive, which is really a prescription for the use of antimicrobials to be added to feed, but currently only 2 antimicrobials are approved for that purpose, but with an expectation that over-the-counter antimicrobials will be moving into that Veterinary Feed Directive for medically important antimicrobials that are being used in feed. And then the third source, of course, is through prescription. Guidance for Industry 213 transitions medically important antimicrobials from use in water over-the-counter to prescription only, and also provides a mechanism for therapeutic claims for production uses of antimicrobials, meaning that that growth promotion and feed efficiency uses perhaps we're seeing that benefit because of a therapeutic benefit. So GFI 213 provides a mechanism for seeking approval of claims for therapeutic purposes. There are significant differences in how antimicrobials are used in human medicine versus how they are used in food animal medicine. Obviously, in human medicine, the primary purpose is for treatment or prevention of infection. Physician determines the indication and the route of administration, the dose frequency, and duration of treatment. There are no restrictions on extra-label or off-label use of antimicrobials in human medicine. That's all left to the discretion of the physician. On the other hand, in food animal medicine, drugs have to be used according to specific instructions. and for specific purposes. So, for example, an antimicrobial using to treat a respiratory disease caused by Pasteurella multocida. They can only be used at the specific dosage, duration, frequency, and route of administration as approved. And while extra label use is allowed, there are very tight restrictions. It has to be done under the guise of a veterinary client-patient relationship. There has to be record keeping, and certain drugs are prohibited from use in an extra label fashion. Obviously, there's a lot of sources of controversy, but not the least of which is the concern that the use of antimicrobials in food animals can serve as a reservoir or source of antimicrobial resistance for humans. And the more that we expose these organisms to antimicrobials in animals, the more the opportunity for them to develop resistance to those antimicrobials. Although that may be true, in fact, in a very simplified general sense, there's really not the clear scientific evidence as to how that happens and to what extent that exposure is leading to microbial resistance and hence affecting human health. And while it's very plausible, there's simply no hard evidence that connects human cases of infection with a resistant bacteria and that use of antimicrobials and the use of antimicrobials in food animals. We simply don't have the traceback mechanisms to show that a particular antibiotic was used on a particular farm, resulting in a resistant bacteria that then caused a foodborne illness. Further, there's little evidence at this point to suggest that eliminating or greatly reducing the use of antimicrobials in food animals improves human health or reduces the risk of antimicrobial resistance in humans. Denmark, as you may know, has prohibited the use of antimicrobials in food animals for growth promotion and feed efficiency purposes. They can only be used therapeutically. That ban has been in place for quite some time, and yet there's been no improvement in terms of the decreased frequency of antimicrobial resistance being seen in humans. Indeed, some evidence would suggest that there has been an increasing prevalence of antimicrobial resistant infections in people since that ban took place. Admittedly, there's no control. We don't know what might have happened had that ban not been in place. It might be significantly worse than it is now. But we do know that there has been significantly more use of antimicrobials in animals for therapeutic purposes since that ban was put in place for preventive and growth promotion and feed efficiency purposes. There are several benefits from an animal perspective to the use of antimicrobials. First, and perhaps not least, is the animal welfare benefit. By preventing, controlling, and treating disease, we can reduce or eliminate the pain and suffering that animals are exposed to when they become infected. Food safety. Healthy food or healthy animals produce safer food, and I've got another slide to give you an example of that in just a second. There are economic and efficiency benefits by using antimicrobials for their growth promotion and feed efficiency purposes. We can feed less food, produce less animal waste, and therefore have an environmental positive impact as well. The disadvantages are why we're all here today, and that is the concern that that use is in fact contributing to the development of resistant bacteria. Dr. Scott Hurd, a veterinarian and researcher at Iowa State, had a collection of pigs that he sampled at slaughter. These animals were all healthy at the time of slaughter. When presented to the Food Safety Inspection Service for inspection, all of them passed inspection and were not visibly ill. Upon post-mortem examination, though, 7% of them had internal adhesions that were suggestive of a chronic previous infection. And of those 7%, they were 90% more likely to be contaminated with salmonella. So indeed, there are some benefits from a food safety standpoint for use of antibiotics in animals. So which is preferred? Do we want to use lower dose in more animals, as the case is today, or do we want to move toward a situation where we are using higher doses in fewer animals and only using the antimicrobials for therapeutic purposes? There's some suggestion that that lower dose, because it provides a continual exposure to a large number of bacteria to the antibiotic, provides greater opportunity for resistance to develop. On the other hand, some researchers would suggest that a higher dosage will kill off all of the susceptible bacteria, leaving those that are resistant to survive and no longer having to compete with those bacteria that are not resistant, and thus allowing the resistant bacteria to thrive. With that latter approach, a higher dosage in fewer animals, perhaps we'll need stronger drugs eventually, and as has been the case in Denmark, where they banned the use for prevention purposes, they are in fact culling more animals than they were prior to that ban. There are differing approaches on how we should address the problem, and I would agree with Lonnie. We need to be looking at new and innovative ways to approach the problem. The two camps as they exist now, and this is within the profession as well as within the veterinary profession and other medical professions, are the two identified here. To discontinue use, that would suggest that although we may not know the degree of risk caused by using antimicrobials in animals, should we take any chances at all? So this camp would suggest that we greatly eliminate or reduce the use of antibiotics in animals on the possibility that use is jeopardizing human health. The other camp would suggest let's not take any action unless there is sound, solid scientific risk assessment upon which to base that action, and that the benefits to human health, animal welfare, food safety outweigh the risk to human health, which at this point, based on the risk assessments done to date, would suggest that that risk is relatively minimal. But again, and I think the purpose of this symposium is, are there innovative ways that we can approach this issue, and one that accommodates all of the perspectives and interests? So a collaborative approach, if you will, on how we might attack the problem. AVMA's current position is that we do, in fact, support the judicious use of antimicrobials. Let's find ways to maximize the benefits while at the same time we are taking action to minimize the risks that there would be resistance develop. We support greater veterinary involvement in the use of antimicrobials, and we think that actions to limit their use, to limit this very important tool in the veterinarian's toolbox, should be based on the available scientific research and risk-based assessments, and a recognition that indeed we need far more research and far more information than what is currently available to us. Legislation, as you know, has been introduced, Preservation of Antibiotics for Medical Treatment Act, or PAMTA. The purpose is intended to preserve the effectiveness of medically important antibiotics for use in treatment of both humans and animals by reviewing the safety of certain antibiotics for non-therapeutic purposes in food animals. So I think a couple of key words there. Reviewing the safety of certain antibiotics. So that is interpreted to mean requiring pharmaceutical companies ensure that their products would cause no harm. And at the end of the end result being that they're in a position of trying to prove a negative, that their products will not cause harm, and for all non-therapeutic purposes. Non-therapeutic is then further defined as the use of the drug as a feed or water additive in an animal in the absence of clinical signs in the animal for growth promotion, feed efficiency, weight gain, routine disease prevention, or routine purposes. So we are quite concerned about what the definition would be of routine, and indeed, depending on how that is defined, could have significant impact on how or when antibiotics could be used in veterinary medicine. So AVMA does not support PAMTA. We don't think that it's supported by the science, or at least our interpretation of the science, and that indeed is one of the sources of frustration, is we have differing interpretations of the same science. We think that PAMTA would lacks the needed risk-based assessments to impose the restrictions that it would, and depending again on the definition, it would eliminate at least 2, if not 3, of the 4 approved uses for antibiotics in animals. Again, those being treatment, control, prevention, and then production uses for feed efficiency and growth promotion. And indeed, there are animal welfare implications that restricting the use of antimicrobials in animals could lead to more animal disease and hence have a negative impact on production animals. Greater veterinary oversight is a subject of a lot of discussion, certainly within veterinary circles, and some believe that this is the way to go. It is supported by market research that the concerns of the public are greatly alleviated when they know that a veterinarian has been involved in the decision to use antibiotics. There is general agreement, we think, on this greater veterinary oversight within AVMA. And again, we have a diverse membership with different perspectives, but on this, we seem to have agreement. We'd like to see greater oversight and, in fact, ensure that there is some oversight in all uses of antimicrobials. The Veterinary Feed Directive is the primary vehicle for providing this greater oversight, and that degree of oversight should be proportionate to the relative risk, so much greater oversight for antimicrobials that have significance in human medicine, and less oversight for antimicrobials that are used predominantly or even exclusively in animals. And AVMA not only would do, but will continue to do all we can to provide for mechanisms for greater veterinary oversight. We've created a group that we call the Veterinary Oversight Steering Committee that has been working now for a couple of years with the FDA Center for Veterinary Medicine in providing mechanisms to ensure this greater veterinary oversight and the use of antimicrobials. Relative to the issue of how do we resolve it, do we go with a legislative route or a rulemaking through regulation? Obviously, legislation provides less opportunity for input and often is politically motivated. Some refer to this as the shotgun approach as opposed to a more direct rifle approach that really attacks specific issues. So we would certainly prefer a rulemaking process. Let's craft new regulations. It provides for several months, if not even years, for collaborative input and deliberative process, and we would suggest that the statutory authority to impose additional requirements through rulemaking already exists. We don't need legislation to tighten up the oversight. From a Food and Drug Administration Center for Veterinary Medicine perspective, we're pleased with the fact that they are open and supportive of innovative uses of the Veterinary Feed Directive. If, in fact, that is going to be the primary mechanism for providing greater veterinary oversight, then it needs to be a less onerous process than what is currently in place and only being used for 2 antibiotics. The Center for Veterinary Medicine is also supportive of and recognizes the importance of the use of antibiotics in animals for treatment, control, and prevention. So in the long term, they would like to see a phase-in of greater veterinary oversight and a phase-out of growth promotion and feed efficiency. In the meantime, we need the data. Is, in fact, the benefit that we're seeing in terms of growth promotion and feed efficiency really because we're seeing a therapeutic benefit from the use of antibiotics in these low doses and given to large numbers of animals? Anyway, so where are we headed? Indeed, more veterinary oversight. We do have some workforce concerns because of the limitation in terms of production and rural veterinarians that might be able to carry out the needs of this greater veterinary oversight. We do have some workforce concerns and hence the need for more flexibility and innovation in how we apply and utilize the Veterinary Feed Directive. With that additional responsibility comes more credit, hopefully as we work through these issues, but also more blame placed on the individual veterinarian and the profession as a whole if in fact we continue to see problems or an increasing prevalence of antimicrobial resistant bacteria. So ultimately we think in the long term the role of veterinarians as we work through these issues is going to be huge, and hence it is and will continue to be a major point of emphasis and a major issue within the AVMA.